people have a lot of guilt. You know, there's a line of social psychology that claims that most people feel that they're better than other people. And like, I just don't buy that. That isn't what I've seen in my life. And maybe I'm a bit biased because I'm a clinical psychologist and I see more people who are overtly suffering, maybe, than people do in general. Although I'm not so sure about that, you know, because you don't have to scratch very far beneath the surface of most people's lives before you find something truly tragic. And I don't mean the sort of tragedy that you whine about. I mean, you know, your mother has Alzheimer's, or your best friend committed suicide, or you have a close relative with cancer, you have a sick child, or, you know, there's something wrong with you, because almost everyone has at least one really terrible thing wrong with them. And if you don't, hey, you will, so, you know. So, no, that tragic sense of being is there with people all the time. And it's also the case that in my experience, like, I rarely meet someone who says, hey, you know, I'm doing everything I possibly can, I'm a hell of a guy, and I can't see how I could possibly improve, you know? You meet someone like that, you think they're narcissistic, right? And you're right. But most people don't feel that way. They feel like they could do a hell of a lot better than they are, and they're quite acutely aware of their faults, and they don't feel that they're what they should be. And you see, what happens in the story of Adam and Eve as well is that when people become self-conscious, at least that's how it looks to me, they get thrown out of paradise, and then they're in history. And history is a place where there's pain in childbirth, and where you're dominated by your mate, and where you have to toil like mad, like no other animal, because you're aware of the future. You have to work and sacrifice the joys of the present for the future constantly, and you know you're going to die, and you have all that weight on you. And to me, again, that's just, how can anything be more true than that? That's just, as far as I can tell, that's just how it is, unless you're naive beyond comprehension. There's something about your life that is echoed in that representation. And why it is that, I mean, we're such strange creatures because we don't seem to really fit into being in some sense, and that's also what's expressed in the notion of the fall. The existentialists said, well, people feel like they have a debt that they have to pay off to existence for the crime of their being, something like that. And maybe it's because we're acutely aware that we have to offer something of value to the people around us so that they can tolerate us, you know, while we're going about our business. But it seems deeper than that. It's that human beings seem to exist in a post-cataclysmic world, and that's exactly also what's represented in Genesis. And it's very interesting because, you know, in the Adam and Eve story, there's two catastrophes, essentially. There's the catastrophe that occurs when Adam and Eve wake up, which we'll talk about in detail, and become self-conscious and know that they're naked. And their eyes are open, right? So that's the terminology that's used. And to have your eyes open means to have an increment in consciousness, essentially, because eyes are associated with consciousness for human beings because we're intensely visual animals. And so the metaphor of having your eyes opened is the same as the metaphor of coming to consciousness. And as soon as Adam and Eve come to consciousness, they realize they're naked. And, you know, the classic interpretation of that is that it has something to do with sexual sin. And I don't believe that. I don't believe that that's what it means, although there are elements about that are relevant. It's more that to realize that you're naked, it's like, you know, if you dream that you're naked on a stage in front of people, that's not a sexual dream, man, unless you're some kind of strange exhibitionist, right? It's you want to cover yourself up and get the hell off that stage as fast as possible. And so to be naked in front of a crowd is to have everyone, it's to have the judgment of the social world focused on your self-evident inadequacies. And that makes people self-conscious, and that's a real human state. It's associated with neuroticism in the Big Five trait model. But people don't like that at all. They don't like having their fragility and vulnerability exposed to the group. It's one of the two major fears of people, because one is social humiliation, and the other is something like mortality and death. And like your typical agoraphobic, for example, gets to have both those fears at the same time, because it's usually a she, tends to believe she's going to have a very spectacular and exhibitionistic heart attack in a public place and make a terrible fool of herself while she's dying. So, and then that's a good example of the two archetypal fears that characterize human beings. So to me, And I said that I tried to approach these stories as if I didn't know what they were about, because that seemed right to me. Because they're mysteries. Everything about them is mysterious. And why we have them is mysterious. And what the hell you're all doing here is mysterious, you know, listening to this lecture. And so, and reading Jung, because Carl Jung was very, very helpful in this, because he faced these stories with a beginner's mind and presumed there was something to him that he didn't understand, given that they were at the very bloody bottom of our civilization, you know, which is historically perfectly clear, and that they came out of the midst of time. And he wasn't satisfied with the idea, the Freudian idea that God was just the father, or the Marxist idea that religion was the opiate of the masses. It's like, if religion was the opiate of the masses, then communism was the methamphetamine of the masses, I can tell you that. So, you know, you've been betrayed by someone, and so you fall into that underworld of doubt about everything. And it's a serious place to be in that underworld, because not only do you not know where you came from or who you are or where you're going, that's bad enough. So that's the underworld itself. But there's a subdivision of the underworld, like the worst suburb, which is, I think, what hell is, essentially, from a metaphysical perspective. Because, you know, if someone really cuts you off at the knees, especially if they do it in a malevolent way, and if you're going to be betrayed, and you really want to be betrayed properly, you want to be betrayed by someone who's really out to hurt you. You know, they just weren't being stupid. They were like after you for whatever reason. And then that's also, you plunge into that underworld space, and that's also when you start to nurse feelings of resentment and aggrievement and murder and homicide, and even worse, you know, because if people are betrayed enough, they start to obsess about the utility of being itself, and perhaps go to places that no one would ever want to go if they were in their right mind, and to develop and nurse fantasies of the ultimate revenge. And that's a horrible place to be, and that's hell as far as I can tell. And that's why hell has always been a suburb of the underworld, because if you get plunged into a situation that you don't understand and things are not good for you anymore, it's one step from being completely confused. It's only one step from being completely confused to being completely outraged and resentful, and then it's only one step from there to really looking for revenge. And that can take you places that, well, that merely to imagine properly can be traumatic. And I've seen that happen with people many times. And I think that anybody who uses their imagination on themselves can see how that happens, because I don't imagine there's a single person in the room that hasn't nursed fairly intense fantasies of revenge, at least at one point in their life. And usually, you know, for what appear to be good reasons. It's no picnic to get betrayed, that's for sure, and it can shake your faith in being, but if it shakes it so badly that you turn against being itself, that's certainly no solution, that's for sure. All it does is make everything that's bad even worse. So